Hello everyone and welcome to our Buyer Intelligence Group webinar, which will look at key trends and the future shape of human resources outsourcing. I'm Vicki Jenkins and today's presenter is Gary Bragar, NelsonHall's Human Resources Outsourcing Research Director. We'd like the session to be interactive, so while everyone will be on mute during the main presentation, please ask questions by entering them in the questions panel on your screen as they come to mind, and we will have a brief Q&A session at the end. Before I hand things over to Gary, let me quickly recap the benefits of being a member of the Buyer Intelligence Group, looking specifically at the benefits of the gold level membership. All group members benefit from being part of a community of sourcing peers and from a level of free access to NelsonHall's neat vendor evaluations, which help you get started with your sourcing initiatives. However, to take your sourcing projects to the next stage, sourcing decision makers need a lot more. When it comes to screening markets and vendors against your very own specific business requirements, this can be tricky, and maybe it's that you don't have the time to engage with vendors directly or feel that you'd rather be protected from overt vendor sales techniques. If that's the case, you can become a gold member and NelsonHall will carry out the detailed investigation and screening work for you. We will take your specific brief and find all the answers you need to be able to proceed without risk to the stage of engaging with the market, including issuing RFPs to shortlisted vendors. We will investigate the exact nature and maturity of the supply market you are interested in, identify the service delivery models available and which ones are most suitable for your requirements, and tell you which other organizations in a similar situation to you have already outsourced in your market and what outcomes have been realized, such as levels of cost savings and process quality improvements. And on this slide, you can see a table showing the full list of features and benefits of gold level membership. A recent example of work we conducted for a gold level member in the energy and utilities sector in the area of tax outsourcing. And we have done similar investigations on behalf of clients across a variety of different business processes, areas, and across a variety of industry sectors. So that's just a quick view of what you can get from working with NelsonHall as a gold member of the Buyer Intelligence Group. And we are happy to discuss further with individual members at any time. Now I have the pleasure of handing things over to Gary for the main presentation.
Thank you very much, Vicki. Appreciate it. Good morning, good afternoon, and perhaps good evening to some of you. Thanks very much for joining. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be with you to talk about human resources outsourcing trends, or HRO for short. These are based on market analysis we've done on each of the areas that you see on the slide. Now, I was initially asked to talk about HRO trends, but as you can see, there are several HR services. So what I'll be doing is covering just a few slides on each to talk about buyer drivers. So I mean, this is a buyers only call, so you can hopefully you'll be able to resonate with a lot of these reasons if you've either outsourced any of your HR services or you're considering outsourcing services, or whether you're a first generation or a second generation buyer. But what I'll be covering is recruitment process outsourcing, or RPO for short, total talent acquisition, payroll, benefits, learning, multi-process HRO services, and cloud-based HRO services. Now, I just wanted to note that we also do research on MSP, which is managed service provider programs. That really the difference, RPO, as I'll cover next, is going to be mainly hiring for your permanent workforce, and MSP is primarily hiring for your contingent workforce. But we're going to be producing an MSP market analysis. We should be publishing that within the next couple of weeks. So that would be something that's available. We can do a deeper dive once that's published. But for now, let me go on to the next slide and talk about, so again, recruitment process outsourcing. I've been covering the space for about 10 years. In fact, like yourselves, I was on the buy side before NelsonHall for many years, and we had outsourced when I was on the client side, our human resource services, including recruitment process outsourcing. And traditionally, when RPO first started in the late, 1990s or early 2000s, RPO consisted primarily of sourcing, recruiting, selection, assessment, administration, and to some limited degree onboarding. And I say limited, primarily meaning, sending, new hires a link to enroll in their benefits, maybe helping them getting their badges and so on. And that's really evolved since then. And as you can see, RPO really has evolved with what I like to call value-added services. So sure, RPO is still, the basic nuts and bolts of, sourcing to get the best candidates and hiring them and getting them on the payroll. But now more and more of the vendors, and think about this yourselves as a client, if you've not outsourced yet, or even if you have outsourced, or these things your vendor is helping you with, and if not, these are things you could consider what they could help you with, because most of the vendors do have this capability that they're helping their clients with their talent strategy and workforce planning, helping to clients improve their employer branding. Many of them are not just hiring external candidates, but they're managing internal mobility. So, internal recruitment for when people are moving, whether it's on a lateral or a promotional basis. Post onboarding, so that's kind of what I meant on the prior slide, that it's really now evolved onboarding, that many of the vendors are also doing new hire and employee engagement, so to help make sure that retention is increased, because companies are making such a significant investment these days, and that's that applies whether you're outsourcing or doing this internally. But and I know, because when I was on the buy side in the mid 1990s, I was managing recruitment. It seems like all the excitement and energy is involved in the recruitment process, but really what companies should be doing is, you've spent all this time and energy hiring people, you need to spend that same amount of time and energy to make sure that your new employees are engaged. There's also a lot of help that RPO providers are doing in terms of measuring new hire and hiring manager satisfaction, conducting around retention, conducting employee surveys and exit interviews, and really, I would say the creation of talent pools and talent communities to match candidates, or pretty much the latest emerging service, along with, there's really been, I'd say over the past year or two, a significant increase in focus on candidate engagement. Okay, just a slight delay in my screen, waiting for the slide to move. Let's see. Okay, well, I'm waiting for my slide to move on how RPO has evolved. Okay, great. On the next slide, the top RPO buyer driver. So really, why are companies outsourcing their recruitment services? Well, they're looking for scalability and agility to meet peaks and valleys, because I think most companies, it's not a consistent process through the years. I mean, certain months, maybe there's a huge hiring of salespeople or maybe retail associates, depending on which industry you're in. So rather than have a large internal staff of recruiters that may be swamped, a few months of the year and then idle maybe, other times during the years, it's much easier for an outsourcing specialist to scale up and down and move the resources around. Also, buyers are looking to improve their performance results. They're looking for better quality of hire. They're, their core business, an outsourcing specialist. So they're looking to also not just who has the best skills, but also who can fit culturally within an organization the best, and who has the best chance of increased engagement and better productivity. Cost, I think, is always going to be there, particularly important for first-time buyers. But now we're seeing more, I would say, more second-generation outsourcing, more cost containment and control being important. Experienced buyers looking for cost reduction to also come from retention and improving time to fill, improve time to productivity. We're also looking for buyers looking to transform the tools and processes they use. And as I had mentioned before, buyers are also looking for broader talent management and strategy consulting capability. So they're looking for help around, as I mentioned, employer brand development, candidate engagement strategy and marketing, specialized diversity initiatives, workforce planning, even talent management expertise in terms of ongoing performance management and training and development. Okay, all right, we're on the next slide. Current and future state of RPO. Pretty much in the first bullet point, I've really kind of covered the future state of what buyers are looking for. They're looking for increased help building, talent pools, so candidates are ready is needed. We're also seeing quite a shift. When RPO first started 10 plus years ago, was primarily more larger companies, what we consider at NelsonHall a large market to be, of companies with more than 15,000 employees. But really, we're also seeing a lot of growth in the small and medium-sized business market, and we kind of define the mid-market as 500 to 15,000 employees. But even some companies under 500 are outsourcing their recruitment services because they're trying to achieve the same benefit. And so we're actually seeing we're pretty close to there now, but we're predicting about 50% of the market share is going to be on companies with less than 15,000 employees. Another trend we're seeing, so this is something you can consider yourself, because many of you might be on the call or multinational clients, and we're starting to see a large shift. In fact, last year, a little more than a third of the contracts that we saw were multi-country contracts. Now, a lot of these may start out with, let's say, for example, you're in the US, but you also have employees in the UK, so we're seeing a lot of add-on services for additional regions. I mean, yeah, some do start with a full push of multi-countries, but many, the trend is more start within one region. You're successful, and you're happy with the vendor's performance, and then you add additional regions. We're also seeing more blended services that I'll talk about in a couple slides from now, more both permanent as well as combined with contingent hiring and including MSP contracts. And we're seeing more personnel on client sites moving from really strictly in a recruiting mode to more strategic talent advisors and talent coordinators. Okay, shifting to the next slide, what I wanted to do is just briefly mention a couple case studies, and I'm not going to read all of this, and these slides will be accessible along with the recording after this is over. But just briefly, a couple examples. As I mentioned, consulting is becoming bigger. So there's an example of a leading insurance provider. So Kelly OCG has provided consulting expertise to them to recommend an optimal site for a new contact center. And the scope of work included hiring for over 55 case manager nurses within 90 days. And so even though this was a smaller contract in terms of number of hiring, it was really more, the emphasis was on consulting for the new contact center site. But what happened, really, it wound up saving the client $441,000 in cost. In terms of the hiring that Kelly OCG did for them, they were able to fill the number of hires in half the usual time, and they were able to do that in part by using the specialist to attract the better talent. So they only had to interview 2 candidates for every one that was hired, and then they increased retention, that 90% of the candidates remained on assignment after the placement. Just one other example, just switching the slides on. I think there's a slight delay in my slides being moving to the next one. So we should be on Tyco International. Not moving. Okay. For those of you following my screen here, we're looking to move to the next slide. Okay, here we go. Tyco wanted to embed best practices in its recruitment functions, and they were looking for a talent acquisition partner that had consulting capability to help achieve their goals. And they engaged with FutureStep, who's a multi-country RPO provider in 3 different regions, and they contracted with them for employer branding services, hiring 300 people in China, 20 hard-to-fill positions in Malaysia, redesigning recruitment processes in Brazil, as well as hiring in the UK. And basically, some of the results that you could see on the slide is they not only streamlined the processes across regions, but for example, in China, they reduced time to hire by 63%, going from an average time to hire of 95 days prior to outsourcing to FutureStep to now be done in 35 days, and they improved new hire retention at the same time. Okay. Moving on to total talent acquisition, as I mentioned before, and these are just some statistics. So, as I mentioned before, RPO is primarily for hiring of permanent workers. And what we're seeing, though, is that about 2/3 of all RPO providers have blended offerings that include hiring for both permanent and contingent workers, and including managed service provider offerings. And about 10% of all contracts that we're seeing are for hiring of both permanent and contingent workers. And we're expecting to see that increase over the years as buyers are really looking for vendors to help meet their wider workforce challenges and become more involved in helping define what the hiring need is with the hiring managers and finding an appropriate sourcing approach, whether the need is permanent, contingent, or both. Moving on to the next slide. So what we're seeing is that what we would consider a key success criteria, and this is something you should be thinking about whether you're doing recruiting internally or you're outsourcing it to a specialist. When RPO and MSP first started, they were kind of viewed, and still are today, as separate processes. However, and separate talent pools being developed, but more and more RPO providers, and I've been to a couple client events within the past month, and both of the RPO specialists are also offering MSP services, and they're really looking now at combining as a total talent acquisition offering, and they're developing talent pools based on skills required, and they're filling those talent pools, whether they're with people that are looking for permanent employment, or they want to be hired on a contract or contingent basis. So really, companies, the trend is they're looking for who has the best skill sets, and let's look at those candidates and not worry about if they're, what type of employee they want to be brought up on as. Okay, the next slide. So really, what buyers should be looking for is vendors to help build their workforce planning capability to incorporate both permanent and contingent workers, and develop strategies for managing the total workforce. And as I mentioned before with RPO, MSP contract sizes, I mean, it's really not only for large companies anymore. Probably on the small end, I've kind of noted this in parentheses on the slide, is, we're seeing, contracts, this happen to be in Europe, but, for as small as 100 hires for contractors, or sometimes companies do it based on spend, which really, I mean, annual spend can be, on contingent workers, anywhere from 2 million up to 500 million. It really varies, but one of the benefits also that if you're a buyer and you're outsourcing the management of your permanent and contingent workforces, if it's a blended contract, your outsourcing provider, they're also able to more readily support a smaller engagement, because they can move around resources between the RPO, the permanent hiring, as well as the contingent hiring. Let's take a look now. We've spent quite a bit of time talking about recruitment, because that is a big deal, but also equally as important is paying people. And so more and more companies, and payroll would be one of the most mature HR services that has been outsourced. So really the top payroll buyer drivers, or companies are looking for improving their compliance, or just making sure they're compliant. They're looking for process efficiency to support increased productivity. They're looking for best-in-class technology solutions. They want visibility of their global data. They're also looking to reduce payroll processing costs, improving payroll accuracy and timeliness, reducing processing errors. And buyers are also looking for providers that have a breadth in their payroll services offering, meaning they're also looking to outsource at the same time and attendance, absent management, human capital management, or HCM technology, talent management processes. They're also looking for comprehensive help desk support. And international buyers are also looking for vendors that have multi-country capability. So let's look at a couple examples briefly. Here's one, Infosys, one of the multi-process, also a payroll specialist, outsourcing provider. They were awarded a contract by one of the world's largest gold producers to support HR and payroll processing for a client with 10,000 employees in the US, Peru, Ghana, and Australia. And the client requirements including wanting to optimize the cost of the payroll and HR operations, and they also wanted to consolidate the HR and payroll processes across the multiple country locations, and also to standardize globally. And so just briefly, some of the results in Australia, payroll accuracy was improved from 95 to 99% in 4 months. 22% savings was achieved on the cost of their operations, and that was partly achieved by consolidation of payroll operations at delivery centers in Pune, India, and Monterrey, Mexico. Another example in Asia Pacific, for a global Fortune 10 company, Excelity delivered standardized payroll processing to support the client's M&A growth strategy for 14,000 employees in 33 legal entities that included operations in China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. And a main benefit the client was looking for included standardizing payroll operations across those regions. And so some of the results were not only being able to standardize those payroll processes, but improving employee experience, standardizing reporting across the 33 legal entities, ensuring 100% regulatory compliance that included 50 different cities across all of those entities. And so we're looking for the future state of the payroll market to also, similar to RPO, and it's even bigger in payroll, but the mid-market itself is the largest segment at nearly 50% of the outsourcing industry. So, I mean, really it applies to all size companies. Payroll outsourcing does. I mean, even more so, I would say, than RPO, which I just spoke about. Contract lengths. I mean, think about yourself, what you're looking for, whether you've already outsourced or if you're thinking about it. But generally speaking, they're, if it's one country, they usually start out with three years, 5 years are more standard for multi-country. But we do see contracts up to a maximum of 7 to 10 years, and there's various benefits that either way I'd be happy to talk about from my experience, having been on the buy side, having outsourced. Certainly benefits of a longer contract. But we're seeing growth. Really, it's all across all industries, but I mean, it's more primarily we're seeing growth in payroll from retail, manufacturing, energy, and utilities, and financial services. And we're seeing vendors really trying to provide a seamless approach to payroll across multiple geographies. We're seeing vendors investing in partner relationships with Workday, SuccessFactors, and Oracle, that I'll actually talk a little bit about more when I get to HR Cloud services. We're also looking at vendors, and you should be looking for your providers to see if they're doing this as well, but we're seeing vendors making much more significant investments in analytics. And I would say of all the provider analyst events I've been to the past, within the past year or two, the main emphasis is they're looking to improve the user experience. We're also seeing vendors capitalizing on investments they've made on behalf of their clients in robotics process automation, or RPA, and artificial intelligence, or AI for short, to increase efficiency and processing speed while improving the user experience at the same time. We're seeing more investments in security and safeguards to protect data across the globe. We're seeing vendors continuing to transition legacy on-premise clients to newer cloud-based versions of their software. And we're also seeing, complementary offerings, as I mentioned before, to include time and attendance, but also HR administration, benefits, HCM, talent management. And we're also seeing a small number of vendors offering employer of record services, enabling them to support clients looking to scale into regions in which the client does not currently have a legal entity. And so, some of those providers that do that would be Safeguard World International, TMF Group, and Niamo. And if that's of interest to anyone, we can always talk about that later. Moving on to benefits, and I've done this in taking a look at first generation buyer drivers, as well as companies that are in their second generation of outsourcing benefits. Both are looking to improve the employee experience. Both are looking at reducing operating costs, although the second generation is looking for more competitive pricing. First generation really more focused on reducing administrative burdens, minimizing risks, updating their existing technology, leveraging best practices, improving compliance, and often they don't have the money to make these investments internally. So the second generation buyers, as you might expect, sometimes are in their second deals. If they're changing vendors, sometimes it might be due to dissatisfaction with their current provider, or maybe they're looking to consolidate vendors. Maybe they've had several vendors and they're looking to consolidate because more and more vendors are becoming specialists in different services. But they might also be looking for a wider suite of services within benefits administration and better technology. So moving to the next slide, really kind of the future state of benefits administration. We're seeing more use of RPA technologies beginning to emerge, including automating Affordable Care Act, or ACA for short, in the US, communications. We're seeing RPA becoming more widespread, including robo advisors, basically. I had an experience recently calling my benefits provider, and I was actually thinking, I wasn't even thinking in terms of RPA, but basically I was kept getting referred to Tier 1 when I needed a specialist, but the type of responses I was getting from a Tier 1 provider, I was almost thinking that, gee, this could be automated, and that really, the resources, I needed were just for, a Tier 2, so kind of standard canned answers. I think we can expect to see more kind of robo-advisors in the future. But really, clients are looking for improving the participant experience to be more personalized. We're looking for delivery structures to merge retirement and health and welfare agents to minimize transfers. As we all know, that can be certainly frustrating if you have to, to avoid callers, answering the same questions within each call. And over the next 3 to 5 years, what we're going to see is multinational corporations rolling out global benefits platforms and adding on administrative services in select countries. And again, and this is across industries, but we're seeing early adopters being in high technology and financial services sectors when it comes to global benefits platforms being rolled out. Let's talk a little bit about learning now. Here, learning, we're taking a look at that in terms of the top performance objectives and top drivers. So first, really, is the strategic transformation. Companies are looking to reduce their time to competency. They're looking to improve effectiveness of training. Revenue and competencies. Clients are looking to increase their overall revenues by improving productivity and filling knowledge with skill gaps. Companies are looking for improved compliance. They're looking to mitigate risks, especially in high-risk consequence environments. Moving on to the next slide, cost reduction. Companies are looking to reduce, or I should say centralize and standardize training administration processes. They're looking to improve learner engagement with training material and productivity on the job, in addition to the learner experience itself. And they're, increasing engagement can be done through many ways, whether it's the actual learning platform itself, personalized learning, just-in-time learning, social learning, and use of gaming. And we're seeing the future market really over the, more companies looking to use the performance-driven model, vendors with wider talent management capabilities, to emphasize strategic transformations and incorporate recruiting, performance, and succession as part of their learning services. That is, those vendors that have those multi-service capabilities. We're looking at learning BPS, or business process service deals, becoming more focused on one or two learning functions. So when learning outsourcing first started, we were seeing larger contracts that would include what we consider all four towers to be, which are administration, delivery, content development, and technology. And now it's more focused on, it might be outsourcing of content development, or maybe just outsourcing of delivery combined with administration, and so on. But we're seeing more delivery modalities that would include digital learning, including interactive videos, VCT, which is virtual classroom training, as opposed to ILT, or instructor-led training. We're seeing RPA adoption increase, especially around administration. In learning, we're seeing government continue to lead, but we're, in terms of size, in terms of large contracts, there's some actually very large military and defense contracts out there for learning. But we're also seeing growth coming from healthcare, energy and utilities, and financial services. But again, it really applies to all services. And we're also seeing pricing becoming more outcome-based in nature. Just a couple quick examples. NCR, a client of Raytheon Professional Services, wanted to increase employer engagement, reducing time for technicians to complete work orders. And so they had 2,600 engineers in 100 territories with 31,000 pieces of equipment, and they wanted it to increase learner engagement and time to competency while reducing training costs. And so what Raytheon Professional Services, or RPS for short, did at the time was they used analytics to identify trends in data and the problems to address. And doing that, they were able to redesign the learning curriculum for employees to focus on developing those critical job competencies around those areas. And they also built a mobile app for employee self-services for technicians to remotely access learning in the field. And the results were significant. They were able to reduce the amount of low performers from 62% to 4%, and high performers increased from 36 to 49%. They increased the use of digital training. They were able to lower training costs by 17%. And they increased time to competency that used to take 20 weeks to 7 weeks. So that's a 65% reduction in time to competency, pretty significant. Next, IBM, for a pharmaceutical company, they wanted to maximize employee engagement and reduce costs. What IBM did was they streamlined operations by leveraging its global delivery network and automating learning administration, including logistics coordination. They assumed reporting, and in a nutshell, they were able to save this client between $100,000 and $150,000 per year. Let's take a look next, just two more services to cover. Multi-process HRO, or MPHRO for short. So when I was on the client side, as I mentioned, we outsourced most of our HRO services, and there's many reasons for clients wanting to do that. It could be to reduce or manage costs, mitigate risks, do a technology overhaul, implement new cloud technology, consolidate and migrate to one system, streamline processes, driving greater efficiency, reduce duplication, standardization, simplification of processes, reducing HR administrative burden, and consolidating HR services across vendors and even across regions. And from a client point of view, I always thought it was a major benefit I mean, again, there's pros and cons I'm happy to talk through, but certainly one of the pros from a client point of view is the whole governance structure. If you have a provider that can be a specialist in multiple areas, then having one governance team to work with makes your life easier as a client. Looking at the future state of multi-process HRO, we're also seeing more mid-market organizations adopting cloud services. We're seeing, unlike the initial HRO, multi-process HRO contracts that included everything, recruitment, benefits, learning, payroll, administration. I mean, some contracts still include that, but we're seeing more and more what we consider multi-process HRO centered around payroll and HR administration. And we're seeing contracts for those services being cloud-based, about 2/3 of those by 2020. And we're seeing more vendors expanding their cloud-based HR services, combining multi-process HRO with software as a service platforms, and also increasing their analytics capability. Finally, let's finish with cloud-based HR services. When we talk about cloud services, we're really talking about 4 major components. We're talking about HR cloud consulting services, HR cloud SaaS or software as a service implementation, and cloud AMS support or application management services support, and HR BPaaS, that's HR business process as a service. And so really of those 4 services, we're seeing HR cloud implementations, the largest segment that vendors are helping their clients with. HR BPaaS would be the second largest segment. Application management services support would be the third, and then consulting would be the fourth largest of those markets. But the drive, like, clients are looking for cloud-based HR services that you'll probably be able to resonate with many of these. Or if we, kind of look maybe separate, and some of these are similar. If we look at cloud-based HR drivers, it's really to transform HR, implement faster, make updates easier and quicker, improve cost, access to HR, software product innovations that can be implemented quickly. In terms of cloud-based business process as a service, those drivers would include clients are looking for increased compliance, streamlining and standardizing existing HR processes. They're looking, basically what they've had internally is a lack of time or skills or expertise to do this internally. They're also at the same time looking to improve the user experience and increase their adoption rates of self-service. And they're also looking to support a mobile workforce and drive better decision-making through the use of analytics. Just to finish here on the future state of cloud HR services, we're seeing companies purchasing HR cloud services. In the future, right now, they're purchased more single service, but we're seeing more bundling of services in the future. As I mentioned before, we're seeing about 2/3 of the organizations looking to move from on-premise HR systems to a cloud system combined with HR BPaaS services. We're seeing more vendors looking that may have a preferred or exclusive HR cloud technology to adopt a more agnostic approach. We're seeing companies buying HR cloud consulting services. More of those, will have a pre-existing relationship in place with the vendor already. We're seeing cloud-based HR technology developments, including improving talent management functions and expanding open networks to increase access to and integration with third-party providers. So I've covered quite a bit in the last 40 minutes. I appreciate your time in listening to me. As I mentioned before, I mean, this was meant to be a broad overview of top buyer drivers that you can, resonate with and put yourself in the shoes of, these overall, drivers that we're seeing. And here are some the trends that we're seeing in the market, and think about how they apply to you and whether you should be considering that if you choose to outsource your HR services, or if you already are, to get you thinking, is your vendor doing this for you already? So with that, I'm happy we have time to take some questions. I do have one question that came in, and as I mentioned a little bit before about the usage of RPA in payroll and benefits in learning, the question was, could I talk a little bit about the usage of robotics process automation, or RPA, and RPO? And yeah, that's a very good question. And some examples that we're seeing that are more common of how RPA is being used through automation is of analysis of candidate profiles on social networks to determine who's more likely to be receptive to solicitations for jobs. We're seeing analytics that show usage of analytics in RPA to show which combinations of words in a job posting generate the most response, and then linking those to the quality of the candidates who are ultimately hired, so we can make job descriptions better in the future to attract the best talent that we want. Selection and assessments are also a target for RPA to ascertain the best fit candidates and the most likely to stay and that are to be productive. And I think we're going to see a lot more used in the future. It's just, I would say, in the early stages right now. Let me see. Vicki, are there any other questions that you've seen come in?
Yes, there is a question about the vendors in this space, and if you're seeing more offshore or nearshore delivery.
Sure, it's a very good question, and it's it's a little bit of both. Really, that vendors, and I think the way most vendors are operating is they're giving a choice to their clients, and there's certainly benefits. So I think the earlier trends I was seeing a few years ago and several years ago was an increased use of offshoring, and I think that still is the trend today, and we've seen evidence in a couple of those examples I gave. I think one with emphasis using centers in Mexico and in India, but I think now we're seeing more nearshore. So it's still a trend, yes. I would say it's not as heavy as it used to be. There's more of a trend, maybe nearshore and onshore as well, and especially, again, it varies by service, but I'm talking about the RPO before, where we're looking to be more as talent advisors. Not to say that you can't be a talent advisor over the phone or online chatting with someone, but to have a face-to-face sit-down discussion. So I think kind of a long story short, it's really a combination of both. Then I think the trend is still definitely offshoring, a lot of back office work that can be done even in recruitment. Let's say offer letter generation that can be done from anywhere, and certainly a lot of the technology can be done, but more where it's the more higher touch services, more of that done either nearshore or onshore. And then if there's any particular service areas, offline, we can always, look at that because the trends will vary a little bit by the HR service. Any other questions, Vicky?
Not at this time, but I did want to share as far as the specific vendors covering each area, since there were so many different areas that Gary covered today. There is a way within the buyer intelligence group for members to be able to see the NelsonHall evaluations for each area, which would include the plotting of the vendors for each space for the area that is being researched. So what I can do is on follow-up, I can certainly share with the attendees how they can access that information.
Thanks, Vicki, and that's an excellent point too. And then, if there was, further interest in a specific vendor, I mean, many of these vendors, we have detailed profiles that would include a whole, section, generally to a few pages on their delivery structure and their capability of the options of, services that can be delivered near shore, offshore, or onshore. So yeah, I mean, Vicki, I'll just say a few words to thank everybody, but I really appreciate your spending the time with me. I hope this helped to just to give you a good overview and maybe got you thinking about some things of how this can apply to your company. And thank you very much for joining. I appreciate it. Back to you, Vicki.
Oh, and Gary, thank you so much for taking your time to share this information. Really appreciate it. Great webinar. And I want to thank everyone for joining today. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day. And as I mentioned, I can certainly share some additional information with the attendees on follow-up. So thank you to everyone and have a great weekend.
Thanks. Bye.
Goodbye.